Yeah, so I decided to do the talk an hour ago. So it's not very prepared, but it's hope can do something interactive. If you have questions, just shout them out. So I want to talk about Swift Package Manager plugins, which is something new, I think, in the latest Xcode version since WWDC. And for the last month or so, I've been working on adding them to RSwift. So that's what I want to show you, what I've been doing. And hopefully you can use something like this in your projects as well. Let me start by explaining what r.swift is. r.swift is a tool that generates static references to resources. So that helps during development. For example, this is a demo project. Here I have a assets catalog with images and colors, and I have a strings file with some strings, and I can use them, refresh, use them over here. So for example, instead of writing out the string CocoaHeads here, this is a reference to the string in that file. And also a reference here to the image, as well as to the color. And then I can change it, for example, and this is where it's useful, if I decide to delete this image, or somebody else decides to delete the image, now the project build should no longer compile. Build failure, yes. The image isn't available. So this, instead of rendering a blank image, it now gives a build error. So I can change it to some other image. It auto-completes because it's generated. Let's change it to this. Refresh. New image. If I want to use a different string, there's a string called hello, which has an argument. I can do that as well, so I can say hello. I can either call it like this, which should work, yes, or I can do it like this, heads, which should, yes, also works. So that is basically what r.swift does and how it works. And as you saw, each time I build this, this gets updated and works again. So if I remove an image or add an image, this generated thing changes. So let me show you how to add it to, if you have an Xcode project which doesn't have RSwift yet, how you can add it, because that has changed since the latest version, which isn't released yet. I'm working on a new version which adds support for Swift Package Manager plugins. So the way you can add it to your project is to go to your project settings here, go to package dependencies, add a new Swift package dependency. Normally you would use a version, but this isn't released yet, so I'm using a branch, refactor. And I add it to my project. And as you can see, this is a Swift package which has two things, an executable and a library. And in this case, I want to use the library inside my app target. And here it's downloaded the package and all its dependencies. And now if I want to use it in this project, let me first build this project, which should fail right now, in theory. Well, it should have failed. It's a cached result, but I can clean it, and then, but now it's slow. Yeah. So this project also uses in this case, a storyboard, but it doesn't work because it doesn't know about it. To add a build tool plugin, you go to your targets, go to build phases. And this is new in the latest Xcode version. Now it says run build tool plugins, this section. And here you can add one of the plugins that's in scope of your project. And in this case, my only dependency is RSwift. And it ships with two build tool plugins. rswift generate internal resources or rswift generate public resources. I want this one. And now it's added it as a build tool over here. Let me double check something, yeah. And now I should be able to build the project, which is now slow because I cleaned everything. And it succeeds, yeah. So this is how you would add it to an Xcode project. And now you can well, use all the rswift tools. So this is how you could use it as a user. There's one other type of project, which is this project, which is a Swift package manager project. Let me close this. So if you have, you can build, instead of using an Xcode project file, you can also have a project that's only built using a Swift package, like package.swift. You can open that, and that's this project. So this one also uses the rswift as a dependency, and that's configured not in Xcode because there's no Xcode settings, but in here. So this project has a library and an executable, and it has one dependency, which is in this case my local version of rswift because I'm using it for development. And then in one of your targets, you can say, I want to use the rswift library as a dependency, which is the same thing I did in Xcode when I added the project. I said I wanted to use the library as a dependency. And then this plugin is used, which is the same thing I did in Xcode as well. Through the UI, now I'm doing it here, saying I want to use this plugin. And that means that now when I build this project, the way this works is this is my build log, and it's, is that the correct one? No, I want to build the library. Oh, that was this one. The very first thing it does before building anything else is build all the plugins it needs, because otherwise it can't do the rest of the build. So it builds my plugin. To build that, it needs to build all my dependencies. So these are all part of rswift. rswift depends on Swift argument parser, so that's built here. But after that's built, it can then, as part of the build process of building the library, my test library, which is the one I'm building, it runs the custom script here. So that is the step where it's actually running rswift. And then after that, that has generated the our generated Swift file, and now it can compile that. So if you go click on one of these things, this is a generated file that was generated by the rswift tool, and this file is localized in your derived data. So whenever you build something using a Swift package manager plugin and it generates files, those are placed in the derived data directory. So actually when I clean it, this should disappear. I think this file no longer exists now. Yeah, no, I can't find the file, so I need to build it again. And now this file with all the generated code exists again. So that's basically the way it all works. How you can build something like this. And if you have any questions, shout them out. This is the source code of rswift, which I can see because I'm using a local version here. rswift has 6 products, an executable and a library. Those were the 2 things that popped up in the Xcode UI when I added the package. And it also has 4 plugins. So rswift has these targets, which are library targets, some test targets, an executable, and also plugins. So this is the thing that is new. In the latest version, you can define plugins, and you can define two types of plugins. Either it's a build tool, which is something that is run during the build process, or it's a command tool, which is a command you can invoke manually. So depending on what type of thing you want, you can either run it during builds, which is great for code generation, like our Swift. But if you have something you need to do manually, like code formatting or something, or linting, you may want to run that during the build as well. But if you want to do it manually, you can do it as well. So our Swift has two versions. You can either do it during the build, which is the one I've been using, but you can also right-click and say these two are provided by our Swift, generate resources command, and run it manually if you want to do that. So in this case, I want to run our Swift on, let's see, these two targets. I can provide any additional arguments I want and say run. And now I get a warning from Xcode that I'm running custom code, which came from the internet. This is the, you can say don't ask again, or what you should do is show command and read all the code to make sure it's all safe. Yeah. Or you can just say always run. In the case if you're running this on Bitrise, because the first time you run it in Xcode, it also does the pop-up if you run it through Xcode in the build process. If you run it on Bitrise or something like that, you need to pass in an argument saying it's safe to run this, because I mean it could do things. In this now I'm running it manually. Allow command to change files because it's changing files. And this manually run version generated the file over here. So if you want to check in the file, you can do that as well. So those are the two flavors of package manager plugins, either a build tool or a custom command. In this case, I prefer the build tool because I don't want to run it manually each time I change something. But if you want to check in a file, this is a more useful version. If you want to build, do this as well, make plugins that are used in Xcode or in Swift Package Manager only projects. Well, this is the way you do it. You define them over here, and then in your project has sources, which are the libraries you have. You have tests, but now you also have plugins, and this is an example of a plugin. This plugin comes in two flavors. It is a build tool plugin, and it's also an Xcode build tool plugin, because the build tool plugin is the one that's used in a Swift Package Manager only package. But if you have Xcode, then you have some more things, so that's a second version of the same plugin. And the things you can do in this code is very limited, because you can basically only import foundation and nothing else. So what I do here is create a directory where I can put my, my output file. I get in here the target, which is the target I'm trying to build. And I use that to get all the source files, because the way our Swift works, it looks at all your source files and figures out what all the things are it needs to generate. So in this case, I need access to all the source files. I filter out only things I'm interested in, and then I generate here a build command. And this is the thing that you see in the build log. This is the thing that's run at some point during your build. And here you see the name rswift generate resources for, which is the name that showed up somewhere here. Run custom shell command rswift generate resources for generic module my test library. Yeah, so you can, oh yeah, and so this build command has a name and it uses an executable. In this case, it uses the executable rswift, which is from this package, and it's listed here as a dependency. So as I said, you can run very few code in there because you can only access foundation, but you can depend on an executable, which I do here, and therefore I can do all the things I need to do from inside this executable. Yeah, and that's it, I think. Yeah. Any questions on that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
So first, a general question, remind me, can you now use resources in a Swift package?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
So I'm guessing that, you mentioned that there's two things it builds, the Xcode build tool plugin and the non-Xcode one. So there's the first one, I know you technically explained this, but I'm just trying to understand it. So does the first one work on packages that you're developing here? So if you wanted to create like a Swift UI view in a package and it had resources, this would...
Yeah, so that is this example basically. This is a Swift UI package.
Oh, so I thought that was in a...
Yeah, this is not an Xcode project. This is a pure Swift package thing, in this case using Swift UI, which has an image. You can have a directory resources with images and fonts and stuff.
And will it work for any... Will it work for any sources or any products and libraries so long as you're including it? Or does it struggle to work on more than just one? It'll generate, like, it has to generate a, it has to generate the...
You mean if there are multiple assets?
Yes, there we go.
You mean RSwift, the tool?
Yes.
Yes, it generates a separate file for each target.
Yeah.
So and then you can use it from within the target.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm realizing I'm mixing up your talk on
Yes.
Swift plugins and...
I showed two different things, but yes, our Swift works for each target, and as well as the build tool, if you gets invoked on a specific target. So if you're building two targets, then it gets invoked twice for each target.
So I can remember indeed that RSwift, it was run as a build script, and then it would generate the file.
Yes, so that's the previous version. Before this, you had to manually invoke the build script, and now this is basically the build script.
So now the build command is inside this Swift package manager library. So you don't have to run the command from a shell script anymore.
Yes, so the previous version, the way it worked, you would here manually create a run script and then write out all the same stuff that is now done here.
Okay, thanks. It's clear, because it was also unclear to me. It's like you still, because you said you still have to run the script. It's like, oh, but what's the difference then? So now it's different. Yeah. And my second question, which is more of a marketing question, what's the difference? What are the advantages of RSwift above SwiftGen, which is basically the same thing?
I think the main advantage is that SwiftGen didn't exist when we started. So Matthijs and I worked on RSwift together.
And RSwift is more. RSwift is more opinionated. I think SwiftGen, so SwiftGen gives you a lot of options to customize, and RSwift don't.
Oh, okay.
So what I think still is unique to RSwift is that it really reads your Xcode project, so you don't have to tell it yourself like, oh, here's an asset catalog and here's a storyboard that you have to process. RSwift looks at the Xcode file, figures out what it depends on, etc., and then generates the right resources.
This directory to look at all the Swift files.
And in complex projects, if you do white label, etc., then when you build an Xcode project that excludes for one white label version a certain asset catalog, then RSwift will actually not generate that
because
resources.
Targets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good advantage.
So it really understands your project.
Especially for this company.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the previous version before the Swift package manager thing, you pointed at Xcode project, and it scans the project and figures out the target. And now this version basically does the same thing, but now using Swift Package Manager. Here you get the targets.
Yeah, what's pretty cool about this Swift Package Manager support for build tools is that we always abused CocoaPods, for example. CocoaPods only to add a library to your project and then use the code inside your own project. And Ardent Swift isn't really code, it's a code generator, like SwiftLint or a Swift formatter. It's more like a tool like that. So it was always a bit of a abusive way of using a hack, a hack of using CocoaPods, and now it's really supported by Swift Package Manager in a native way, and Xcode really understands that it's running a build tool and has this security stuff, like, okay, you're going to run code from the internet, and instead of CocoaPods just running random code without warning you. So that's pretty nice. Yeah.
So I just kind of want to know what's like the main, or rather, what can these plugins actually do? Because r.swift seems to me like, yeah, it could just be a build phase script. Like it could have always been. It didn't need to be a plugin whatsoever. So in that vein, like what do plugins really add?
So a build tool plugin is basically the same as a script, but now instead of writing a script in Bash, you write it in Swift, and you can ship it as a part of a library. So instead of telling a user copy this Bash script in your run, now you can write it yourself. Like this isn't a lot of code, but I mean it is some code, and this is shipped as a library someone can reuse.
Right, and yeah, and no need to configure the build phase scripts, etc. That's really handy for sure. But like, I'm just wondering, like, what other plugins have you seen in general? Like, what can plugins do? Like, what are the
basics examples are code generation and like linting things. But I mean that already can be a lot of stuff because code generation. Well, because it's now all Swift, it's a lot easier to write a simple code generation for a little file you might have, configuration file. So that I think that is the main example, especially for the build phase one. And the generate one, you can do a lot more stuff, like format my code, whatever. You can imagine stuff you want to run as a command on your Xcode project. The WDC talk is also a great introduction on this.
Yeah.
But I think it lists those two examples.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. This is actually the first time I've ever even heard of Xcode plugins today. So it's nice to know that it exists.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, I think another use case could be for a project could be if you have a certain folder structure with template files for a new feature, then you could create a right-click thing, create new thing, and it creates a folder with and then an argument could be the name of the feature. So you scaffold basically a new folder, for example. That could also be a thing you do. So basically, that I think a lot of repetitive work that you do in a project could be automated by tools and plugins like this. But that's an interesting thing, right? Now you know it exists, so now you can think of where
this kind of stuff has existed for years, of course. Every environment has code generations and things, but now that it's in Swift, it's suddenly a lot more interesting.
Accessible, right?
Yeah.
Well, we used to write them in Objective-C.
Yeah. Or in Ruby.
For your,
yeah.
I have two. Of course, I have two non-questions. One, around Xcode 5, there was a whole plugin structure for Xcode where you could also have menu items and user interfaces and stuff like that to make code generators as well. And my question to you is, there's no UI possible with Xcode Swift Package Manager plugins. You cannot make a dialog where you can configure stuff, or can you?
I'm not sure, but this is the UI that I know of.
Well, it's a UI. And, so you have to make arguments and stuff. So there is a UI, and it's very.
But maybe I don't know if you could actually trigger a pop-up. Maybe I haven't tried that. It would be interesting to try. So here This is the right-click one. This is not a build tool plugin, but a command plugin, and this actually does run code. So in this example, I run our Swift on each target that the user selected. So maybe instead this is actually running the executable. So if this executable would pop up a UI, then maybe you could
Interesting.
actually do that. Yes.
Cool.
Unless Apple blocks it. All these plugins run in sandboxes, which you can only do. I don't know if you can access the internet. Probably not. And you can only access your maybe, I'm not sure. Maybe the command thing can do more than the build thing. So yeah, you can play around with this.
Yeah, interesting. Until Apple kills it, of course, but that's you never know that.
Yeah.
Because there were hundreds of plugins for Xcode, and then suddenly Apple says, no.
Also plugins to filter out your log output, right?
Log output, mock generator, stuff like that.
Hello. Is it working? I'm curious about if these plugin things are only in Xcode or works with VS Code as well. I sometimes make command line tools in Swift in VS Code for Linux, but does it work?
So this project is a pure Swift package manager project, so this you can also run from the command line, and then they also run. So it's not Xcode dependent. I think the name is Swift. It's part of Swift package manager, not part of Xcode. So you can run them on the command line, and the command plugins. So I have four plugins. These two are build tool plugins, but the command plugin actually has a name, a verb, which you use from the command line, and a description you can see on the command line. And this is the message that's shown on the command line as well, asking for permissions. So any place Swift package manager and Swift can be run, these can also be run.
Okay, thank you.
Gradle plugins in Android support incremental compilation. So basically, for example, the Android Gradle plugin, if you don't change your resources, it's not going to regenerate the R files. Do these kind of plugins also support caching, so that if you don't change your resources, it's not going to regenerate all the
I think so, but I haven't tried it and not sure yet. Here you can see this run script build phase will be run during every build because the option based on dependency is not checked, which is a user interface option that's not available. So I think this message is old. But you can configure input and output files. And I think if none of the input files have changed and nobody depends on any of the output files, then the plugin won't run. Which, at least that's the way it used to work in Xcode only before this version, before Swift Package Manager. So I think, I don't know if it's currently working, but that's the way it's intended to work, that it only compiles, runs when needed.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.